Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this midweek study as we are going through the book of Ruth. Hopefully, you can see my screen, and we're picking up, let's see, on verse 9. And again, we're not going to set any speed records as we go through this, but it just seems every time I look at the verses and start reading, more and more things come. And I like sharing them with you. It's a little bit deeper than maybe what we have gone before or what you're used to. It's deeper for me too. I'm going deeper in some of this study, and but yet I find it's just so enriching and so fascinating. So bear with me if I share it with you and it seems a little too much. You know, we'll even it out somehow as we go. So as we get to verse 9, Vayiten, and it uses the Tetragrammaton Yahweh, Lechem, Umatseh, Na. And what I notice right away as I'm learning the Hebrew, I'm going through grammar and doing memorizations on how the suffixes end and so forth. And suddenly I see this word as I'm circling it with my cursor that ends strange. It should have a letter like this. If you look at the one right next to it, you'll see this little thing. It's called a hey, but it looks kind of like an H with a little corner broken out of it, and then a little T underneath it. That is how a word is supposed to end if it's a feminine word. But here we have this last letter, which is called a Nun Safit or final Nun, and it has this little T, which is the letter A, vowel A hanging out there all by itself, and this little H or hey is missing. And so that jumped out to me, and I had to dig pretty deep in the grammar books to find out that, for every rule in a language, especially Hebrew, there are exceptions, and this is one of those exceptions where it is missing. And they point out that Hebrew, for the majority of the time it was taught, was a verbal language, not a written language. Literacy was very low, and even if you were literate, you didn't have pen and paper, you didn't have a notebook. These were written on parchment, which are animal skins with the hair scraped off and special preparations, and you need special ink and tools, and just out of the reach of most people. So you didn't have ability to carry around, the Bible like, we do today on notebooks and paper copies and in my phone and on my computer. And so things were verbally transmitted. And they point out that this word, Metsena, is pronounced the same way, whether there's the little H at the end, which would be somewhat silent, or, if it's there or not, you don't know. So it's only when it's written down that you see it. And so just a little interesting tidbit here of the grammar. Um, so what Ruth is saying here is to them, she's talking to excuse me, who Naomi's talking to. She's talking to Ruth and Orpha and saying, go back home. Naomi's going back to Israel and she's trying to dissuade them from coming. And so this sets up this really interesting exchange here. And so she says to them, may Yahweh grant you rest. Well, as we know from Hebrew, rest is like a Shabbat. There are different types of rests. And so this rest here is a different type of rest than we normally see talked about, like for the Sabbath day rest, or this is more of a rest of finding a place to set yourself. It is not the type of rest that's an internal peace or security. It's just a place to belong. So she's not saying, may God give you perfect peace. May God give you, guidance on your journey and take care of you for the rest of your life. She's saying, I just hope you find a place where you fit in. I hope you find a place where you belong, which is kind of key because of the journey that Ruth is going to go on, finding a place where she belongs. And so another nuance here of the Hebrew is that here is the word ish, translated incorrectly as or it's Isha, and translated as Ish, it's really the word for wife. if we hover over it, it's the word for woman and wife. So there's a little bit of double understanding going here, saying, okay, hope that you can be a wife and find a husband. And right here is the next word for husband. So it's wife and husband in this place that you're looking for. Hope you can fit in somewhere and get on with your life is really what she was saying. And then, of course, they did a kiss, which is, more of the Middle Eastern kiss on the cheek, or European kiss on the cheek, not like we think of it in the United States. And then, tells them to go on their way. And obviously, they had a real love for their mother-in-law because it says they lifted up their voices and wept. That this was, a very um, difficult thing for them. And this is strange, seeing how, they both came from the land where they were, still living. They had families there. They had mothers and fathers and other siblings, but yet they were so attached to Naomi that they didn't want to be separated from her. Um, at this point, we're going to go take a look at the Jewish commentary that's in the book of Ruth that I've been sharing with you, and it has some really interesting things. I kind of highlighted them in yellow. Here in yellow is the part I just talked to you about the missing letter, missing hay, and in Hebrew, it's quite well known that there is what's written, the traditional form, and then what's read as well as understanding. Um, seems that Jewish and Hebrew people are not so particular on looking at every word and dissecting it from a fact of comparing like we do, being um, you know, Westerners. We think everything's got to add up. 1 plus 1, it has to equal 2. If a letter's here, it has to be there. Everything has to be perfectly in line. Jewish philosophy and Hebrew philosophy is that, okay, let's look at what the end result is going to be. Let's look at how this is going to bring you into a closer relationship with God. They don't get so out of sorts if there are misspellings or words that appear to be different or things out of order. Where we like everything in order, it's all got to add up. It's all got to line up perfectly. It's got to be spelled right and all of this. Um, Jewish mindset is not that way. So they talk about this, that it's indistinguishable because it's in the spoken form versus the written form. And then just for humor here a little bit, remember that this commentary was written in the Middle Ages and talks about Naomi's blessing, saying that a woman has no contentment except in her husband's house. That doesn't preach real well in today's environment, but again, this was the Middle Ages, and so they read into this. Again, this is the Jewish commentators from the Middle Ages. Then it brings up something here about that they wept, commenting on the wept. And in Judaism, there is many different levels of study. We're on a very surface level of what I'm doing here, mainly because my background is very limited and I'm learning and choosing to stay in a more a role that I can apply to my spirituality and enhance my walk with God. But there are deeper levels, and one here is highlighted in yellow, and it's called the Zohar. You may have heard of that. There's another word associated with it called Kabbalistic or Kabbalah. You may have heard that a little bit. Some celebrities, I think Madonna, the singer Madonna, was heavily involved in Kabbalistic or Kabbalah, and this is the more mystical side. I was going to use the word spooky, but I'll stay with mystical side of Hebrew study. In fact, they have rules about it that you have to be 40 years of age before you can even study it because they want you to be grounded and well versed in the Bible and be able to sort out the different things that you hear. But here, the Zohar, just to show you the mystical side, they state that the spirits of their dead husbands stirred within each of them, invoking them to tears. Um, again, yeah, that's that part of it. I don't describe to it, but it's interesting to notice there. It makes it into the commentary, and I just wanted to share that part with you. So, getting back to our narrative, verse 10. Here is where we find a response from Ruth and Naomi, because remember, Naomi's telling them to go back, and we have a response from Ruth and Orpha. Forgive me for mixing the names up here a little bit. So Ruth and Orpha respond saying, "No, no, we're not going back to our people. We're going to go to your people. We're going to stay with your people." And then here we see in verse 11, Naomi says, "No, turn back, my daughters." Remember last week we talked about the three times that a potential Jewish convert has to be dissuaded or discouraged. This is time number two, and we'll see time number three coming in verse 12. But then it enters into some really strange commentary. In verses, Naomi says to her, "Why will you go with me? Are there still sons in my womb that may be your husbands?" And then here, verse 12 is the third time. "Turn back, my daughters, for I'm too old to have a husband. And even if I, should say that tonight I get a husband and I'm going to get pregnant." And verse 13, "Would you wait for them until they're grown? Would you restrain yourselves and have no husbands until my kids are grown up?" And she just said, "It grieves me, that all these things have gone bad for your sakes, and this is all very unfortunate." Well, what is she talking about here about these children in her womb, and why was this even brought up? And what this goes back to is Jewish teaching called Levirate marriages. And to show a little bit about where it came up, I'll show you a history of it where it first shows up, and that is in Genesis chapter 38. And this is the children of Jacob, of Israel, and one of them was a guy named Judah. And of course, Judah plays out very significantly in Bible prophecy, because it's of the tribe of Judah that the Messiah comes forth. So we always take note of him. But Judah was a very strange guy. He wasn't a very nice guy from what we read here. And in chapter 38, it talks about him marrying this woman who was a daughter of the Canaanite. She conceived, bore a son named and and then he had another son called Onan and another one called Shelah. And so Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. Another woman in the Bible that has a fascinating story around about her, and was actually part of the lineage of the Messiah. So this is all very relative to us, but obviously didn't do very well parenting. We see in verse 37 that Judah's firstborn, what he did, we don't know, but he did wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. Here's where we get into this levirate marriages. It has to do with keeping the family together, preserving the firstborn and the seed of the family name. And so, because died, it became the responsibility of the second son to raise up a family to the brother's wife. And again, in Judaism, they have whole volumes written on how this levirate marriage was supposed to work, and just so many rules and regulations. It is a little relevant because we see that Jesus spoke about it when the Pharisees came to tempt him and said, "Oh, remember this guy? He had seven brothers, and the first one took a wife, and then he died. The second one took her, he died. The third one took her, and then all seven died, but she lived. And in the resurrection, whose wife would she be?" Remember that story? This is where this is based, in this levirate marriage. And so what happened here is Onan was not a very good guy either. He knew and had this attitude that he didn't want to preserve his brother's seed. And so when he was trying to fulfill this Levirate marriage and impregnate her, he didn't, he spilled his seed on the ground. Again, I don't have to spell it out any clearer than that. And this displeased the Lord. This again has created a whole group of teaching. You may have heard the word onanism in some religious systems. I think in Catholicism for sure, this onanism is spoken about. Well, here's where it comes from. Here's where, and maybe the terminology in which they were using it today is not the same as what it was back then. But again, here's where it originated with this levirate marriage. And so what uh, Naomi is saying, are you going to wait for my sons to grow up so you can continue the family name? So much time is going to pass. This is just unreasonable. It's not going to work. And she's doing everything she can to get her um, daughters-in-law to turn back and go back home again. And so that's where we're going to, I think, draw a close today because verse 13 or after we finish verse 13, we start into a new part of your journey, and we'll look at what happened between the two of them with Ruth and with Orpha, what choices they made. But again, I found this just really interesting how all these stories weave together. How the story here with the sons that weren't born or that they could marry, how that ties into Genesis, but then it also ties into Jesus and the stories that were presented for him on how they tried to trick him because this levirate marriage was such a complicated thing of who could marry who and how to preserve the family. So I hope you found that interesting. Thanks again for tuning in. God bless you all, and we will see you next time. Bye bye.